Our moderator for this session will be Bonnie Royster, Executive Director of the CDLS Foundation, which serves individuals and families affected by Cornelia de Lange syndrome, a rare genetic syndrome. The foundation has a strong history of a close and productive partnership with CDLS medical experts. In addition to charting the strategic direction for the foundation, Bonnie serves as staff liaison to the CDLS Research Committee. Before joining the foundation, she was vice president of the United Way of Greater Hartford, and she has more than 25 years of experience in leadership roles in the public, for-profit, and nonprofit sectors. Bonnie, your speakers have wonderful stories to share, so I'll turn it over to you now to get it started.
Thank you so much, Mary. I really am so thrilled to be a part of this group today. And good afternoon and welcome to NORD's opening session on parent and patient partnerships. We all thank you so much for taking time to be here with us today and to allow us to tell our stories of struggle and triumph in forging partnerships that ultimately create value for us and we hope provide inspiration for you to do the same. Again, my name is Bonnie, and I'm Executive Director of the Cornelia de Lange Syndrome Foundation, or CDLS for short. In the early days of our organization, there were really only a handful of parents who had children with a variety of symptoms that no one really knew what the core issue was or could even diagnose what was wrong. I heard so many of their stories of, creating makeshift feeding tubes, chairs, moving devices, and all the things that they did to soothe their children who couldn't even speak to them or share what was paining them. Or how they were told, don't even bother because your child won't live past 5. But because the parents loved their children, as all parents do, they persisted in caring for them to the best of their ability. And slowly over time, they found each other, and a small group of those parents banded together. They reached out during that time to over 700 doctors, and they asked for help. And amazingly, only one man answered the call, a Dr. Laird Jackson, a legend in his own right. But he painstakingly collected data, provided care and support, and became our foundation's first medical director. He is truly beloved. His dedication and that of those early pioneers has led our organization into what is now 40 years at this time with a research and clinical network around the world. And as Margaret Mead so famously often quoted, a small group of determined individuals really can change the world. So from our world to yours, I'm so sorry. Today, there's an increasing interest in improved patient-centered research. New forms of engagement are emerging that enable researchers to get input from community members on research goals, methods, and implementation. This input often includes stories which are useful for understanding the lived experience of illness and encounters with healthcare organizations. Your stories and the stories of our panelists can serve to better communicate the complex context of patient experience and help create research priorities. With that said, I'd like to take a moment and allow our panel today to introduce themselves and share their stories of how partnerships have worked for them. If we could begin with Erin.
So I'm Erin. Thanks again for having us today. This presentation is called Fate, Fervor, and Good Fortune, the tale of Oliver's diagnostic journey. Next slide, please. So this is my son, Oliver. He's a happy, thriving, soon-to-be 3-year-old boy. He's alive and thriving thanks to science, research, perseverance, and most of all, teamwork. This is the story of a group of providers determined to solve a diagnostic odyssey, mystery, no matter how complex it be, and a family determined to never give up, and a collaborative partnership that made this all possible. As you can see in the picture, Ollie is a very healthy-looking little guy. The truth is, he has always looked healthy. I really believe that his well appearance was a big factor in the challenges that we faced as we so relentlessly tried to figure things out for him. Next slide, please. Allie presented with several initially minor and seemingly insignificant issues from a young age. You can see the list of them here, beginning at just 2 weeks old. But before we knew it, we were facing some bigger and scarier issues. The nightmare really began when he started to choke on soft and dissolvable foods, often requiring the Heimlich maneuver. As a pediatric nurse practitioner myself, I am of course certified in CPR and choking rescue, but had never imagined needing to use these skills in my own home. And as our family's fear for his safety grew, so did our motivation to establish a diagnosis and make a plan for him. In this video here, you can see how the simple, taken for granted task of chewing and swallowing became a constant struggle for Oliver. You may be wondering who would video their child gagging like this, but the answer is an incredibly stressed out mom just determined to convince doctors that something's really wrong. Ali started feeding therapy right around 8 months of age, and his therapist was really quick to point out that she agreed with my instincts that something was not right here, and that we were likely dealing with more than a typical feeding delay. And she was really an important part of this odyssey in communicating this to his healthcare providers. Next slide, please. So this timeline depicts the many specialists and therapy teams that evaluated Oliver along the way. Some were impressed, as they call it. Others were not impressed, and most were perplexed. But the timeline that we can see here ends with the neurologist ordered admission for an expedited workup. But in actuality, this is just where we have the beginning of the realization that there is some hope here, and that we're possibly going to be able to figure this out.
So if you go to the next slide, I called this part of Oliver's journey good fate. So it just so happened that Oliver was admitted for his MRI on a Friday evening, which generally would be covered by the resident team, and I would come in sort of as the on-call hospitalist the next day, review the case with the residents in brief, and probably have Oliver be discharged back to home to continue his diagnostic odyssey. But what's interesting is that that night happened to be the one night of the year where we give our resident physicians the night off to enjoy a graduation celebration. And so I happened to be covering as a resident again. And so I had the opportunity to sit down with Aaron and Oliver and do a pretty thorough history and physical examination. And even so, you can see I went back to my note from that night and pulled up my assessment and plan. You can see that I was overall not very concerned at the time based on Oliver's symptoms, even despite the fact of how long his issues had been going on for, and just how well he was appearing, as Aaron had mentioned. And if you click the next slide, I even highlighted in my note to say that I thought it was actually very low suspicion that he would have a neuromuscular disorder or any other underlying metabolic or genetic disorder, which couldn't be farther from the truth. And so I think this is a reminder to me in doing work with, taking care of patients with rare disorders. You have to be a little bit humble and have a high degree of humility to be wrong and know that your perceptions are going to need to change over time. So next slide. So from that first night, even though my note may argue otherwise, I do remember saying to myself, there just seemed like there was something off. Something wasn't right for Oliver, and there was something that was maybe going on that we just hadn't figured out quite yet. And at the same time, I just happened to be reading more and more about Sir William Osler at the time, one of the greatest diagnosticians in history of modern medicine. And one of the famous quotes that have been attributed to him is, listen to your patient. He's telling you the diagnosis. And I think about this quote a lot during our weekly diagnostic clinic here at the hospital, where we meet a lot of families and patients who've been going through a diagnostic odyssey. Many, many specialty visits, many, many lab tests and procedures in order to find an answer for the symptoms that they've been having. And I try to remember this statement to remind me that what we're working with is right there in front of us. We just need to listen a little bit closer. But if you click the next slide, at least in Oliver's case, there was a lot of things that were causing a lot of background noise for us and was making it very difficult for us to find out what exactly was going on. And so this is the part of the journey that I call fervor. The many, many months that we worked together with Erin and her family and multiple different specialists, both within our institution and outside of it, to try and come up with an answer for Oliver. And so there were certainly many misdiagnoses along the way, which paused things and delayed the ultimate care that he needed. Certainly self-doubt on the aspect of myself and whether or not I was missing something or if there's something I could be doing better. Certainly fatigue, trying to deal with this day in and day out, not only myself, but for Erin and her family. A lot of patience that was necessary, a lot of missed work for Erin and her husband, frustration, of course. And then, of course, at the heart of all this was a worry. When was the next time he was going to have another event? When would he need the Heimlich again, right? And if it was a significant event, how would we recover from that? And so throughout all of this, we remained empathetic, and we tried to, I tried to put myself into Erin's shoes and figure out, what I would want done if I were a parent in this situation. And that's what sort of drove us forward to keep working to find an answer. So if we click the next slide. So the final part of the journey, many months into this, is sort of what we call good fortune. And so I use a picture of our hospital. This is Nemours A.I. DuPont Hospital in Wilmington, Delaware, where we all work. And I am very lucky to be working in a place like this where multidisciplinary care and collaboration happens every day, and it's sort of natural. And so one of the most important members of Oliver's team has been his speech and feeding therapist, who constantly has been seeing Oliver, working closely with him, and was confident enough to come to me on multiple occasions and say, Matt, I think there's something going on. I don't know what it is, but I don't think this is behavioral. I really think that there's something at the heart of this that's preventing Oliver from being able to swallow safely. And so with her encouragement and our continued kind of fight to try and figure this out, we ultimately were able to put together a team to trial a medicine that we thought might be helpful for him, a medicine called Mestinon. So our concern had been that maybe Oliver had a condition called congenital myasthenic syndrome, which is a neuromuscular problem where the nerves and the muscles, especially around the muscles of the mouth, aren't particularly working quite well, and this could be causing him significant weakness and the inability to swallow different textures of food. And even though we had tested for this in many ways, both genetically and with antibody studies, and everything had come back normal, there were certain cases where this is ultimately not the case, and we don't find an answer that way. And so we were able to try this medication in the hospital in a very safe manner, and it's unbelievable to watch. Within 20 minutes, Oliver was eating things he had never eaten before. And it was a really powerful moment for me as a clinician. I know it was a powerful moment for Erin as a mother. And from that point forward, we sort of had our answer. And we now know that Oliver does have congenital myasthenic syndrome, and he's followed by a number of specialists, both internal and external, for this care. And I'm happy to say that he's doing quite well. So we click to the next slide. Oh, I was just going to say I will end my part by saying that Oliver, like I said, is now a happy little guy. And even though this picture depicts that he doesn't quite like me very much, I know in his heart he does. And we are still able to follow him for primary care, which is great. And it's been a really enjoyable time to watch him grow and develop now with the therapy that he needs.
So just a closing remark from me. So Ali has had this diagnosis for almost 1.5 years now, and he's been taking Mestinon since that initial trial with another medication that was added on in the fall. It'd be false to say that it's not a little sad that we know he has to deal with a chronic illness, but we are just so thrilled with his progress. He loves to eat. He hasn't choked in a very long time. He loves keeping up with his 2 older brothers. And, although we know that there will be ups and downs and the journey is far from over, we know that with the right team on our side, we'll always have the access to the care that he needs. So I'll share this message for other parents who might be in similar situations or feeling like they're in the darkness of solving a rare disease mystery. So my husband and I were admittedly at the bottom of the helpless and hopeless hole for a very long time, and we couldn't even picture Ali growing up because a choking death just felt so imminent, which is crazy to say, but it's the truth. So if you feel like you're just not getting the answers that you need, my advice is just to keep going back, keep questioning the doctors, keep searching for the answers. And if you can just find that one medical provider who will really listen, put themselves in your shoes and go that extra mile, that, you'll come out on the other side. So just keep going.
Erin, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I think it really illustrates the importance of never giving up. And I think I also appreciate you, Doctor, for just not giving up and being persistent. So now I'm going to turn our presentation over to Rich and hear his story and share what happened in his life.
Great. Thank you so much, Bonnie. Really appreciate it and really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody here. So by way of introduction, my name's Rich Horgan. As the slide says, I'm the founder and president of Cure Rare Disease. Cure Rare Disease, as you'll see on the subsequent slide, is a nonprofit biotech organization based out of Boston, Massachusetts. And we are on a novel mission to develop tailor-made or customized therapeutics for patients impacted by rare and ultra-rare diseases for which there are no effective treatments today. And if you could advance to the next slide, you'll see that this mission is quite personal to me. Like many of us here, we're all here for mostly personal reasons. And my personal reason is my younger brother, Terry. Actually, it was just his birthday a couple days ago, but now 26, actually. Terry suffers from an ultra-rare form of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And for those of you who may not be familiar, DMD, as it's commonly abbreviated, is a muscle wasting disease that is caused by a mutation in the dystrophin gene. Dystrophin acts to stabilize muscle membranes, and a lack of dystrophin leads to a cascading effect of destruction of those muscle membranes, ultimately resulting in a fatal outcome. Next slide, please. So the way that drug development works today is challenging for rare disease patients. Very, very high fixed costs go into the development of drugs such as Lipitor and others. And so at the other end, there needs to be a large number of patients to be treated with the drug in order to justify the pharmacoeconomics. For my younger brother, though, unfortunately, given that his form of the disease is so rare, there was no therapeutic activity surrounding him. And so I stepped into trying to change that outcome. Next slide. And so to do that, I had to form a team. And one of those folks who is incredibly near and dear to that team is here with us today, Dr. Monkolek, who will go on to explain the process that we pursued. But the idea that I pursued in the early effort was to form an interdisciplinary team of researchers at the early stage on the academic side, preclinical and translational expertise to ensure that as we handed it off from discovery into preclinical development, it was a smooth transition. Regulatory support and manufacturing expertise, which for gene therapies is absolutely essential given the complex manufacturing process that has to take place. And lastly, the clinicians in the clinical team. Not just the clinician, but also the support of the administration at the University of Massachusetts, where we'll be dosing in the coming months. And the idea here is that we can form a team that can easily transition from one phase to the next phase of drug development, ultimately ensuring as we can move quickly and expeditiously as time is our greatest enemy. Next slide. And so this is how the structure looks. We have a team that is comprised of a number of academic institutions as well as industry partners, CDMOs and CROs, such as those you can see before you here. And the idea here is that we're developing drugs based on the individual's genetic profile. For many rare diseases that are of a genetic cause, errors in the genome result in the manifestation of the disease. For my brother, it was the deletion of just a few kilobytes of the gene. And so what we did, as Monkel will go on to describe the process, is targeted and develop a solution for Terry's mutation and are soon to be dosing him with first-in-human CRISPR drug. Last slide. And the idea here is that this partnership is a partnership between researchers, between clinicians, between family, and each of these individuals plays an especially critical role. And a big message that we hope to get across in today's conversation is that this role is essential, and this role comes with accountabilities to both parties, and it's really an opportunity for each and every party involved to be an equal partner in developing a life-saving therapeutic. And ultimately, as I'll touch on after Monkel finishes, is the idea that we want to democratize this from here, to expand and ultimately work, as Monkel will describe the process, to expand and eventually work with payers and insurance companies to get the reimbursement for these customized therapeutics. But without further ado, I'd love to pass it off to Dr. Monkel.
Cool. Thanks, Rich. And I'm grateful to have this opportunity to share a little bit about our research process. So for all those in the audience who don't know, I'm a rare disease patient myself. I have a rare neuromuscular disease, so I can relate to the diagnostic odyssey that the first pair, Erin and Matt, went through in their diagnostic odyssey. So, and with that, I can also relate to the urgency that a lot of rare disease patients and families undergo, particularly the ones in the audience also. So what I wanted to do in establishing my lab at Yale is move away from that focus on curing mice and also going for academic publications and having a more patient-centric sort of focus. And the way we go about doing that is to start off with the genetic report, me being a geneticist, starting off with genetic report and doing a full genetic characterization. So that means receiving, say, more patient samples in the form of blood where we can extract DNA, and also maybe a skin biopsy where we can create patient cells from it. And so from the DNA we extract, we send it off and do genome sequencing and also RNA sequencing from the patient tissue. And then we can go beyond just the genetic report. And it's important to go beyond the genetic report if, like with Rich's brother, we want to design something tailor-made and very specific to someone's genetic mutation. We're very fortunate that we do have the technologies to start exploring the feasibility of that. And that is the other reason why we get patient cells, because we're not interested in curing a mouse with some generic mutation or something like that. We're actually interested in with one patient in mind or a group of patients in mind, and that actually makes us more engaged with the patient foundation that we're working with. And the last thing is, again, we're not publication centric. We're thinking, what is the road to actually getting this into the clinic and actually benefiting someone, not a mouse, but someone. So we work hand in hand with foundations such as Cure Rare Disease and bring in a team of experts, as Rich has shown, of academics, clinicians, and also industry to actually plan the path forward. You know, the hope is by doing all this that the publication will be a side product rather than the main aim of this journey. And I hope that other academics in the audience, you know, can sort of like relate to this and also know that there is actually a path forward, as Rich had actually shown. So one of the challenges in actually doing this is always me being a refugee, making sure that this is not just available to the privileged few who have the money or the capacity to fundraise. It should be available to everyone. So the thing that we also want to address is accessibility and sustainability. Sustainability, we're very grateful for the funding foundations such as Cure Rare Disease, such as the foundations that you're going to hear in this panel, like Bonnie going over her foundation, and also foundations that are listening in the audience to make sure this research is sustainable. The other way we can make this research sustainable and accessible is also talking to the healthcare providers and the payers of some of these therapies that we're actually developing. So I'm going to pass the ball back to Rich to touch upon that.
Thank you. So as Monkol explained, you know, the process that we've started to develop and the framework that we're building, not just for Terry, but for many other patients whom we're working on in earlier stages and others that we will come to work with, is one that we really want to create as a tool for society, a tool by which individuals, whether researchers and clinicians or families, can utilize. And no tool is perfect if it's not an ecosystem that includes a way to pay for it. And so, as Monkol mentioned, we have the technology to tackle some of the most challenging genetic diseases out there. And so that piece of the puzzle is becoming solved. As Cure Rare Disease's value add in developing a framework where one can take an idea from bench to bedside in a matter of a few years, that tool is now becoming one that we can rely on, and which we'll soon test as we go to dose my brother later this year. The last piece is, how do we pay for it? And that's one of the most important pieces that folks really need to start to challenge themselves to think about, is what kind of new mechanisms can we put in place? Broad chronic diseases have coverage for many of their drugs that are available, but for rare diseases for which there may only be 1 or 10 or 20 patients, the traditional reimbursement mechanism simply doesn't work here. And that's what we challenge the audience to think about, is how can we not only reimagine how we treat diseases, but how can we reimagine how we pay for treating rare diseases? Thank you.
Rich, Monkol, again, thank you for that just wonderful presentation, so inspirational and so chock full of information. I can't wait to get into it with the audience a little bit later, but I just think that you just touched on everything from the beginning to the end. So thank you so much for that. So next up, we will have Tara and her partner, Dr. Newsom, share their story and what happened for them.
Thanks, Bonnie. I'm happy to be here. I'm presenting with Dr. Newsom. My name is Tara Zier. I have a rare disease called stiff person syndrome, or SPS. It is a neurological disease with autoimmune features. The name does not do it justice. People with this condition can experience muscle spasms so severe that they dislocate joints and break bones. Next slide, please. My symptoms started in 2014 after I lost my former husband to suicide. My kids were 11 and 13 at the time. I was under a ton of stress and I was really worried about my children. And I felt this enormous amount of pressure to stay alive. And I believe that that emotional trauma actually triggered my disease. I went from practicing dentistry to doing karate and traveling to not being able to work, drive, or care for myself or my kids. Next slide, please. It took 3 years, 9 ER visits, and 13 specialists before I was finally diagnosed with stiff person syndrome. On average, it takes 7 years to get diagnosed with stiff person syndrome. I was diagnosed in 3 because I was on a mission. After I was diagnosed, I went on a research frenzy to learn about the condition. I'd never heard of it, just like most people, and who were the best doctors to treat it. And that's when I found Dr. Newsom. It was around the 3rd visit with him at Johns Hopkins where he told me that Johns Hopkins had applied for a grant at NIH, and the grant was denied because there was not enough research to support getting the grant. And that just blew my mind. I remember staring at him in disbelief, like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? And that was a big aha moment for me. At that point, at that moment in time, I knew I needed to do something. Next slide, please. Shortly thereafter, I reached out to local media and we were on the news. I got to share my story, and Dr. Newsom got to share information about stiff person syndrome and raise awareness. And then I knew next we needed to raise money for research. And that's when I started my nonprofit, the Stiff Person Syndrome Research Foundation, to raise awareness and funds for research for better treatments and a cure for stiff person syndrome. At one of my visits with Dr. Newsom, I was going in for blood work, and I remember sitting beside the woman who was getting ready to draw my blood, and she was gathering all these vials, and it looked like a lot of vials. And I looked at her, I said, "How much blood are you taking today?" And she said, 19 vials. I said, "Wow, 19 vials, that seems like a lot of blood." She said, "It is. It's almost what we take for transplant patients." And after that, it became this joke that at subsequent visits, when I would come see Dr. Newsom, I would have this laundry list of information I needed from him, ranging from updated information on research for the foundation, photographs, interviews, and the joke became that I could not leave his clinic until I got 19 vials of blood from Dr. Newsom. So I don't know if he knows that this is going on, but that's what's going on right now. Our relationship has evolved to one of symbiosis and collaboration, which I think is so critical with rare disease patients, to have that collaboration with your doctor, and that's what's going to move the needle forward. I help him raise awareness and funds for research, and in turn, he does research to help me and other patients get better. There is a sense of urgency and incentive for both of us to shorten the diagnosis time, to stop the suffering, and to find a cure.
Thank you, Tara. I just want to clarify the 19 vials of blood that is typically done at the first couple visits. Given that this is a rare condition, we want to try to make sure that we cross all T's, dot all I's, make sure that we know what we're dealing with. Although I have been known as the vampire in our clinic lab, so I appreciate that, Tara. So as I think Tara mentioned, it really is a working relationship, a symbiotic relationship between patient and doctor, clinician, whomever the care partner is in the journey. And so I was thinking about this the other day, and I wanted to put it out there that this is almost like a metamorphosis that occurs when you first meet a patient. You know, there's a lot unknown. You're just starting a relationship with that person, and it's like the caterpillar, and eventually the caterpillar will develop into a butterfly. And that butterfly could be just on the clinical end, whereas you get to know the person, their disease, how it has such a ripple effect within their family. And then also from the research end, the butterfly being, can we push the needle forward, as was mentioned? Can we develop or find better biomarkers that can aid in getting earlier diagnoses so people don't suffer like they are? And then, of course, the holy grail is finding a cure for these rare conditions, which are exceedingly difficult. As you heard, getting funding for rare conditions is challenging because when you go again up to get funding, the thought process often is, how many people is this going to affect? And so I think we have to debunk that myth or that mindset, because obviously our patients are suffering. Next slide, please. So real quickly, you know, my mother had a chronic condition, which I'm sure most of you know, called multiple sclerosis. So through her journey with MS, it gave me really a golden opportunity to see the wide spectrum of good and bad patient-doctor, patient-clinician relationships. And I think for me, this helps, you know, lay the groundwork for what I eventually was going to do in my career, which, you know, to the picture on the left of the slide, all the way to the bottom right of the slide when I graduated medical school, that in between, I had no idea what I was going to do. But I think my, you know, personal experience really shed light into how we need to help people better than what my mother received on the one end of the spectrum. And fortunately, she had some good physicians and care partners that gave me insight into how can we do better as a community to help our patients. Even when there's a lack of treatments available, there's still stuff that we can do for people. Next slide, please. So I know people, when they see acronyms, some will cringe. This is, for me and many others, got me through medical school and at some level college. And so, you know, I think about not just life in general, but I think about our partnership with our patients, that there is a promise for tomorrow, that we have to build a partnership, we have to build a bond with each patient, especially those that are really pushing the needle forward with us, like Tara is in our partnership. And so that road ahead, as we've discussed with many people in our patients, it's going to be not straight. There's going to be some curves, there's going to be some bumps in the road, but building a special bond with our patients will allow us to get to the end of the road, I think, successfully. And this is where the opportunities come up. And the opportunities with building that special relationship with your patient partner, in trying to push that needle forward, in trying to meet those mutual goals, not just for today, but what is the intermediate and long-term goals of that individual that's sitting in front of you? And of course, the ultimate goal, which all of us, I think, on this call and those that are in the audience, is to find cures for these rare conditions so we can help stop the suffering. I'm a big believer in I is not in team, and I've told Tara multiple times that I'm one person, so we need a group of people, which we have started to build over the last decade at Hopkins in putting together the first and only Stiff Person Syndrome Center that's around the world, which I think will help facilitate the research and expedite the research with our partners in crime, i.e. Tara, who has an incredible amount of energy to push this engine forward. And I really appreciate that because she keeps me moving forward as well. And as you know, with any rare condition, any chronic illness, there's a lot of sacrifice that goes into the day-to-day on both ends, the patient and the provider. We need the enthusiasm to continue pushing that train forward. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we often will get questions in clinic. Well, why does it take forever for an idea to finally make it to the bedside? And there are good reasons for that, but I 100% agree with all people that ask these questions. This process needs to go faster. And so it starts really with helping fund pilot projects, smaller projects that can give us the data to move forward to larger studies so we can collect the information we need to develop and find treatments that are going to help our patients. And again, especially for people with rare conditions, because there's a paucity of dollars behind to help facilitate the research. And so I am so grateful for Tara and her foundation and others that have helped contribute to our mission to promote awareness, to help identify the full spectrum of SPS, which really up until about 5 years ago, we didn't have a good appreciation of that. And just to be able to be in this partnership and along with Tara and others, I'm really honored to have a small piece of this journey with people. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara and Dr. Newsome. Tara, I just can't even imagine the heartbreak that you must have gone through, and then only on top of everything else to then have to deal with this. But I really appreciate both you and Dr. Newsome sharing the partnership and the beautiful things that came out of it. So I just want to say, I think that my observation and being in my role and talking to so many parents is that is both personal and professional. That is what's driving so much of what we do. And also that over time, rare disease on average takes about 5 years to discover what it is. And I think with genetic testing, that number is going down. So I think that is also another good development. And the other general observation I find is that because nothing exists, parents and patients just create it themselves. They just create their own foundations, and they do the Herculean effort of finding people to help them. So for any parent sitting out there in the audience thinking, oh, I have no idea what to do or where to start, believe me, you can do it. Because the parents on this panel and individuals on the panel have shown they had no choice. They did it. So it is definitely possible. So I wonder, there's just been so many wonderful stories and successes that you guys have shared. One thing that really jumped out at me is the level of persistence and the fact that you had to become experts in your own disease or disorder and really push people. I wonder if anybody would want to talk about that in particular, the effort it took to be persistent and bring your team together.
Yeah, happy to go first, if that's all right, Bonnie.
Yeah.
I think from my perspective, absolutely resonate with the comments about needing to become an expert. I think in becoming an expert, it's challenging, right? I mean, individuals spend years and years and years becoming, formally trained experts. But I think for me, it really began with just starting to dive in and talk to a lot of people, reading a lot of publications. At first, I really didn't understand most of it, but thankfully there's Google for those types of things. And as I talked to more researchers, the dots started to connect. And so I think for folks out there wondering, where do I even start? Just start somewhere. Just start reading. Read the publications, go to the conferences, meet the people, talk to the people, and I think it's important to develop that level of sophistication, because it's important to be able to ask the questions that are the tough questions and that will advance the conversation. No one individual will be able to take a drug from bench to bedside, and so it's an important part to be able to understand. And you of course won't be on the bench necessarily, but it's important nonetheless to understand how the pieces tie together, where the trouble spots may come from, and that comes from understanding the topic. So that's what I offer.
Just a follow-up question for you, Rich and Monko, about that. I noticed in your presentation, you came up with 3 teams. You knew you needed 3 distinct people or 3 distinct types of people to get to your cure. Can you talk about how you arrived at that?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll offer a couple thoughts, and then Monko, you can offer thoughts. It started small, right? It started with a couple people and an idea of what could we do if we wanted to develop something specific. And so we had my brother's pediatric neurologist, Dr. Brenda Wong, as part of the original team. Some early academic luminaries like Lou Kunkel and Stan Nelson involved, and as well as Monko. And what began sort of as a whisper grew into a roar as Monko and his team were able to take the output from that characterization from the muscle biopsy to develop and show the first proof of principle with the drug that we're using for my brother. And so then it became, okay, we've got the proof of principle. Now we need to run. We need to get the team in place for preclinical development. Okay, let's go to Charles River. And the great work that Tim Yu had done at Boston Children's Hospital paved that path. And then as we got the preclinical pieces together, then we started needing to figure out, okay, how do we actually make the human grade version of this drug? And so going to the CDMOs and finding the right partner who understood the situation, the urgency that was at hand. And so it really was an iterative and cumulative process that we built over the past couple of years, and one that serves more than just my brother. It's really the infrastructure that we've put in place to be able to offer benefit for future patients other than my brother, as we are actively doing now. But Monko, I don't know if you had any thoughts to add.
I'll just be very brief so everyone else can chime in on this wonderful question by Bonnie. I just want to touch upon just teamwork, basically. I think it's very hard, from if you're an expert at something, to know that you're not an expert in everything and just to build that team around it. So me being a junior scientist, it's much easier for me to say I'm not an expert at this, Rich. We need this person, this person, this person, and this person isn't my collaborator, but I'd love to collaborate with them and get their input on it. So yeah, Scott touched on it very well in his talk, talking about, there's no I in team, everything's teamwork. And, and surprisingly, you can get in touch with all these big name scientists that you think would not even give you the time of day, but they would respond back much quicker than me in 5 minutes and say, well, what time do you want to meet with me? And with that, we've been very, very surprised. And, just to, encourage the parents out there listening to this that they will take the time. They are working on rare disease. They care about this disease a lot, and they will. The other thing I want to touch upon about, being an expert, and this is putting my patient hat on, is that not to be discouraged. So when I told the neurologist I wanted to be an expert at this, he just said, look, don't bother, just leave it to the experts. And then 5 years later, I'm opening up a conference and he's in the audience with his poster. So, I think patients are really driven to actually understand the disease inside out. So, an expert, just requires time and dedication. And it doesn't have to be formal. It can be informal also.
And I will add just very, very briefly, a big hats off to Monko and his team at Yale. I must say, in my last 3-4 years of experience in this field, there are a lot of egos, but the humility and the persistence and passion that the LEC Lab shows is absolutely unparalleled. So,
thank you, Matt, Aaron. Any comment on this? Tara, Scott.
I'll go, Bonnie.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree with Rich and Monko, and I think the team is key. You just, can you do it alone? Maybe. Probably take a really long time, but it goes from just the experience with the diagnostic odyssey and what I went through, and the persistence it required just to get to the diagnosis. That was insane. To have to go with your gut feeling and say, I need to go somewhere else because something's wrong. And then I want to touch on what I found to be very valuable is having a superstar primary care doctor, because that's your quarterback. And I went through a couple of primary care doctors before I found the right person who actually referred me to a local neurologist who initially got me diagnosed. And then, after, and she did it fast. She knew something was wrong, and it took almost 3 years to get to her. And she was referred to me independently by 2 different people, actually in healthcare, and said, "Go see this woman. She's great." So I think that's really key to have that quarterback person, because going along this journey, things are going to pop up. You're going to need referrals to different people. So she really helps with that, and that type of process that's needed. And then, she, right after I got diagnosed from the local neurologist, I met with her, and I'd already found Dr. Newsom. Like that night I was diagnosed, I'm on the computer. I'm like, who knows about stiff person syndrome? I'm like, can you get into remission? I mean, I just went on this autopilot, major frenzy. Like I was going to find out that night what I needed to do. And I saw her, it was probably the next day. And we both said, we need to go see Dr. Newsom. I need to go see Dr. Newsom. So she already knew, and I knew. And so I wanted to touch on that, the importance of that piece of it, as the quarterback for your team, whatever your team involves, whatever specialists and everything. Because a lot of rare disease patients will see multiple specialists. So I just wanted to speak to that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with Tara. Having sort of that quarterback in your corner is essential with rare conditions, because, as you saw with all the presentations, it really takes a team effort to treat one person with a rare condition. And so you essentially have to have someone that can take it all in and say, okay, this is what we need to do with the information. If you need to go somewhere different, get another evaluation, it's really important. And I think what I heard from Tara and others, and I hear from Tara when we meet, is that you have to be an advocate for yourself. That is critical. If you can't be an advocate for yourself for whatever reason, maybe age dependent, then having other people being an advocate for you, whether it's a loved one, whether it's a clinician, that is really the critical piece, I feel, especially early on in that journey, that odyssey, and trying to get diagnosed when you know something is wrong. And so it's really, I'm loving hearing everyone's vantage point, because there's really common threads throughout. And it's nice to have these common threads amongst different rare conditions, because we're all dealing with the same situations, both on the patient side and the clinician side. And so this is wonderful.
Thank you. And Aaron and Dr. Matt.
As a primary care pediatrician myself, I think I couldn't agree more. The quarterback concept is so vitally important to this. And I will say, as a pediatrician, it's very challenging to take a child with a potential rare disease and try to do that within the workflow of a normal primary care practice, right? We have very short windows of time, 15 minutes sometimes, to see patients. And so we really, as physicians, need to be thoughtful of this. And when we realize that there's more time necessary, really carve out that time, set away time, make longer visits, be able to really dive in and get to work. Because these things don't happen quickly, as we've all been witness to here, and they really require extra time. But I would encourage anyone who's listening, if they're in this odyssey, to find a pediatrician, find a primary care physician who will work with you, will take the time to really be your advocate as well, and to work through this, because it does take time, and the current setting of primary care doesn't always lend itself well to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just second that with the comment that, from a parent or family member standpoint, you get to the point where you really start to question yourself, and do I need to keep asking these questions? Do I just let it go and give up and accept that this is what it is? And, but I think once you find that person, that, quarterback type person, that you feel like you can share all of your fears and concerns and worries with, and tell them all the things you read about on Google and that you think could be an issue, and, all those things that sometimes people maybe pause and think, okay, I'm outside of my limits now, like this isn't my expertise, the doctors must be right. I think once you hit that point, but then you still, just to trust your instincts that, if you really feel that there is something, don't just take no for an answer just because several people had said no. Just keep going, and you can't really do that without that advocate role that everyone's describing here. So that is really key.
Thank you both. And I will say at our foundation, that is one of the things that we notice is that parents have such a hard time advocating with their medical professionals or with institutions in general that something is wrong. They know something is wrong, but they can't always convince the other people on the other end to take them seriously. So one of the things that we've been able to do is to create tools that allow them to bring the material to the doctor, so it gives them a little bit more confidence. And a couple of other things I will say about rare disease that I find that the rest of society really could benefit from is the multidisciplinary approach that has to be taken to take care of someone. In a typical situation, if you have a headache or whatever it is, you'll go to a specialist, but there's not always somebody looking holistically at that patient. And I do think that is something that the rest of society could learn greatly from people who deal with rare disease. Rich and Monko, if you want to just lead us off into anything you'd like to say to our audience, anything that you think would be appropriate, please do.
Go away.
Yeah, do you mind, Rich? I'll be very quick on this. I'm going to talk from the other side of point of view, from the research point of view. And as you can see, there are a lot of challenges. Scott has highlighted a lot of the challenges we have in research and also research funding. For researchers and basic scientists to get where we need to go, we really need to work hand in hand with the patients. For those that don't know, with rare diseases, the diagnosis rate is only 50% in terms of finding the genetic cause. So, we need to work hand in hand in getting more DNA samples, more patient samples to actually get at the root cause, and then further our understanding of these diseases, and also finding answers for the patients and ending their diagnostic odyssey and getting a genetic cause for those that do have a defined genetic cause. And I just want to end on that because, there are things that the patients in this audience can really help research with.
Yeah,
Rich?
no, I'd second that. I think, patient involvement means patient involvement. The good, the bad, and the ugly, I think, and that means tissue, that means blood, and that's not a painless process, but it's so critical to research. So, for those of you in the audience who are interested in getting involved more, that's one great way to do exactly that. And I think just kind of lastly, have hope and have faith that, it is not impossible to solve a disease. It's not impossible to tackle a disease. It's very hard, very challenging, very scary, very difficult, but you got to start somewhere. And the first step, the hardest step, but it's the first step. So
Thank you both. Scott and Tara, any closing words for our audience?
Sure.
Tara, do you want to go first?
I'll share your weight.
What's that? 19 vials. I'm still perseverating over. I'm not going to be able to let this go.
So sure, I'd like to. There are a few things I've been able to reflect upon that for patients or caregivers. There's some tips that I've come up with in my head, and one, learn about as much as you can about the condition. Education's powerful. And that's what's going to help you be able to work with your doctor, ask questions, come in prepared. And that will help with collaboration. Two, which I touched on before, is the primary care doctor. Find a superstar primary care doctor to help quarterback. And be your own advocate. That's another one. Just go with your gut. Whatever's going on, go with your gut. If someone is saying something that doesn't sit well, keep going. And trust it because it's right. And another piece is connections. Connecting with people, I think, is really key. People with rare diseases often feel isolated. And oftentimes people with rare conditions, it's an invisible condition. So they look normal on the outside, and people just assume they're okay. And that's a little bit challenging in itself because it's hard to answer questions. How are you doing? You look great, responding to those things. Connecting with people who have the same condition or people who you're comfortable talking with, I think is really important psychologically, dealing with these things, I found. And then the last thing I would say is to find your purpose. With this, I think this can turn your lives upside down with these rare conditions. For me, my purpose, I was a dentist. I can't practice dentistry anymore, but I pivoted and started the nonprofit foundation. And that's just been, I'm very grateful for having that opportunity. I wouldn't have had that, and I've been able to find gifts through this disease process. So focusing on what you can do, I think is really key.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say a few things because I think Tara really summed it up and she stole some of my thunder, which she often does. No, I think that what I'll add is it is from the clinician side, it's wonderful to be able to build a relationship with your patients, not just short term, but long term, because you get a chance, and I feel honored to be involved in chronic conditions because you get a chance to see how people do over time, the good, the bad, and the ugly, like what was mentioned, and you get a chance to see what is the true impact of the condition you're treating, not just in the clinic, but beyond. And so for me, that gives me extra motivation to try to push the needle forward with our patient partners and to find better ways to treat them, not just short term again, but long term. And I would say for those individuals in the audience where maybe you're more reserved and nervous to ask questions to your clinician, to your physician, don't be scared. Perseverance does pay off, as you've heard, I think, today. And when you have that uncomfortable gut feeling, as Tara was mentioning, it's okay to go somewhere else to seek another opinion. It's okay to phone a friend. And in fact, there are people that I see in clinic where maybe I'm not 100% sure, do they have this condition or another condition? And I phone a friend, I phone a colleague, and I say, okay, I need some help over here. And that's okay. The end all be all is we're trying to help the person that's sitting in front of you.
Thank you.
That is the most important piece of this. And so I think you have to be an advocate for yourself. It's okay to be persevering. And at the end of the day, the hope is that that's going to promote a better tomorrow. And that promise of tomorrow acronym that I put out.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Scott. And Aaron and Dr. Matt, any parting words for our audience?
I would just say to, again, the common theme, so just never give up. And then, just to kind of try to find the silver lining and the, I guess just with coping with chronic illness or diagnosis or soon to be determined, but not yet determined diagnosis, just to focus on the positive and what yourself or the patient, family member is able to do, and just be grateful that they are able to thrive because of the medical team and advances and science that we're fortunate to have.
Yeah, and I'll just add for patients or family members who might be listening, look for those individuals who mention that they have an interest in rare diseases or treat rare diseases. Because what I found in kind of doing this work is that people who do rare disease work are passionate about it. They're truly passionate about it, and so finding someone who shares that passion to find an answer, I think, is a really critical part of the journey. And for the practitioners and physicians that are on the call, I would say don't hesitate, as Dr. Newsom said, to pick up the phone or send an email to someone outside of your institution. I think a lot of times we become siloed in our roles and siloed in our institutions, but sometimes the help that we need is somewhere else. And now with being able to have communication at our fingertips, don't hesitate to reach out and send an email. The worst that happens is you don't get a response, but I think it's really helpful to try and reach out, and that's where some of the best collaborations that we've had come from.